Hello and welcome to another episode of Grange TV. We have young Eli here playing DJ and a very, very special guest today, Mr. Craig Alexander, the King of Kona, I believe. Alexander the Great, they call you.
Apparently once upon a time.
Thank you very much for being on here. I know you're extremely busy and you just finished a swim session.
Yeah, I'm still, even though I'm an elder statesman now, I turned 45 in a couple of months, I race a little bit, not as seriously, but I've got a race scheduled to come up in 10 days. I had one a week and a half ago up in China, so I'm not on the circuit full time like I used to be, but I still do love. I mean, it's part of my blood, part of my life, the training and the racing. I'm very competitive, so as I said, it's not my day-to-day priority anymore. But when I get the chance and I get openings in the schedule, I like to ramp the training up for 6 or 8 weeks and go and jump in and do a few races, mostly around Asia these days, Asia Pacific region.
Tell me something you said, you're not taking it as serious or whatever, but I know you just did a swimming session before you came out to us. How far did you swim?
I swam 5K, 5,000 metres. So I wouldn't say I'm not taking it as seriously. When I'm training, it's all business. I only know one way to do it. It's just, I guess what's different for me now through my 20s and 30s and even into my early 40s, the whole year was scheduled around my racing. I would sit down. Our biggest race was October, so I'd sit down at the end of October and then plan the next 12 months. And everything was scheduled around high performance and performing at my best at the big races. And it was a 12 months of the year, 24-hour-a-day proposition. You can't, I think physically and also mentally, you can't sustain that forever. And I've had I think this is my 24th or 25th year racing as a professional athlete. As I said, I still love it, but I have 3 kids. Happily married. My wife put her career on hold so we could travel and follow the circuit for 2 decades. And she loves her job. She's an emergency nurse and starting to be a midwife, so she's getting back into that. And I've just had to find different ways to balance it now that it's not the priority. But when I race, I race to win, and I prepare to get in the very best shape I can. So I wouldn't say I'm not serious. It's just not all-consuming like it used to be.
Okay. Tell me about this title, the King of Kona.
Yeah, well, one of the major races in our sport is the Hawaiian Ironman on the Big Island. And the race centres around the township of Kona. And I was fortunate to race there 8 times and win it 3 times. So I had 3 victories there. You
had 3 victories, which is amazing from what I understand. I did a few triathlons back in the extremely poorly. They almost cancelled it, but I did a few. And I'm not one of those people that's going to say, I can relate to it, but I almost drowned a few times doing them. So I can't imagine the distances that you guys are covering. So the Kona trail in the triathlon, from what I understand, is a particularly difficult one. Is it got the reflective heat? Is that?
Yeah, so in our sport we have different distances. You have the sprint distance, it's roughly a 1-hour race. Then you have what's called the Olympic distance, which is just short of a 2-hour race. Half Ironmans and full Ironman distance. So a full Ironman is a 3.8k swim, 180k bike ride, and then a full marathon at the end. And there's a series globally, and it culminates with the World Champs, which is in Hawaii every year. So that race in Hawaii is, it's renowned for being the toughest, I think, because of the conditions, the heat and humidity you get in Hawaii, plus the trade winds. It can be very, very windy there. The geography of the course, it's not a flat course, it's quite a hilly course. And because it's the World Championships, that's the best field that you face all year. So
you won that 3 times, but correct me if I'm wrong, are you the only person to win it back-to-back?
I was the 4th. No, there's been 4 of us. On the men's side, 4 of us. So I was the first. Actually, I think there's 5 now because a German guy just recently did it. I did it in 08 and 09, and I was the 4th to do it. There'd been 3 Americans. One guy, Dave Scott, did it in the 80s. Another guy, Mark Allen, did it in 89 and 90. He went on to win 6, actually. He was incredible. And the last to do it before me was another American, Tim DeBoom, who did it in 01 and 02. So.
But Dave Scott, he's the guy that said that you're the first real champion of the sport. Is that, or am I misquoting him?
No, he did say it. He said he thought I was the first true champion. He's a good mate of mine, so.
Nah, but still,
yeah, no,
I've got good friends. Nobody said Fab, you're the first true champion of triathlon. So how did that? Why? And I'm not saying you weren't. I just want to know how that came about.
Yeah, I think he just liked my style of racing, and he liked the way I carried myself, and he thought I embodied everything that, it's like anything, I guess, like in the UFC, once you've been the world champ, it's kind of like it's a club or a brotherhood that you're always a part of, and nobody ever takes that away from you, and there's sort of a mutual respect amongst the guys and the girls who have done it. It's the same, I think it's the same in a lot of sports, certainly in our sport. A lot of the past champions, or most of them, they go to watch every year. They take a keen interest in who the new guys and girls are coming through, and Dave lives in Boulder, Colorado, and that had been my training base for a long time. So I got to know him, and he just became a fan of mine, and that was I remember when he said that, it was very humbling, because he was a great champion. He won 6 times in the 80s, and our sport's a lot of things now. It's evolved. It's recently got status in the Olympic Games, but for a long time, that race in Hawaii was the sport of triathlon for 20 or 30 years. I know it's its 40th anniversary this year, so we only recently got status as an Olympic sport. But that race in Hawaii was the one race really that took our sport to a wider audience. It was on the wide world of sports, and it was on TV, and people might not know the sport of triathlon. It's a niche sport, but they had heard of the Hawaiian Ironman. So it's kind of an iconic event, and I guess maybe I flatter myself in saying it, but in modern day, Dave and Mark, they won multiple times in the 80s and 90s, and that hadn't happened. Our Canadian Peter Reid won 3 times in the late 90s, and then I was lucky enough to win 3, 08, 09 and 2011. So I guess that's where the title came from, and that's where all those nice comments from some of the past champions came from as well.
Tell me if you can articulate, I know it'd be, what goes on in your mind, or does anything go on in your mind in particular, like, I don't know, tell me if you could tell me at the start of the race, because I'm always curious about this, like at the start of the race when you go, I've got this whole thing to do, the middle of the race where you're probably hurting a lot and you know that you've got the rest of it, and then that final kick where the pain must be excruciating. What goes on through your mind?
Yeah, I think like a lot of sports, there's such a huge mental component. They're not just physical. I'm sure you see it all the time. You have people with amazing physicality and a skill set, but you need an extra piece of the puzzle, that mindset, that mentality, and that discipline through the training, but in particular on game day, on race day. You need to be able to execute, make smart decisions under pressure. And my training, I used to train a lot on my own. I felt that helped me mentally prepare, toughened me up mentally, being alone for those long 7-8 hour training days. And that's when I'd visualize the race a lot and mentally rehearse and think about the race. On race day itself, as you said, the distances are so daunting. I mean, even having raced in Hawaii 8 times, to think of covering those distances can be off-putting, So I used to keep it very, very simple. On race day, I'd have breakfast, do my warm-up, and I'd make sure all my equipment, everything was in order. And when I'd walk down to the swim start, the only thing I was thinking about was the first 2 or 3 minutes of the race. What's going to happen? What's going to happen? The gun's going to go off, and what do I have to do in the first 2 or 3 minutes? So I was very clear in my head of what I had to do, where I wanted to position, who are the guys I wanted to be near, what were the conditions, what was the current and the tide doing, where I needed to be positioned, and how I was going to execute that first 2 or 3 minutes. So I was very sure about that. I think, mentally humans, we're an interesting case study, because the mind is your most powerful ally, but it's also your greatest enemy. And you can second guess things. You can undermine your own confidence if you overthink things. I thought I'm going to keep it very, very simple on race day and make sure that I'm right in the moment when the gun goes off. I know exactly where I need to be positioned, how I need to execute, and then the day will just unfold. So I would break the race down into little achievable sections. In the swim, do a systems check. Am I in the front group? Am I where I need to be? How's my pacing? Who am I around? Coming towards the end of the swim as well, the pace used to pick up a little bit, make sure I was positioned well, and then thinking about going through transitioning and the start of the bike segment. So I wouldn't want to inundate or overload my head with too many things to think about, but keep it very, very simple. And, you know, it's a funny thing. People would often say, well, what do you think about it? It's an 8-hour race. And it's funny to say it, but it used to go quickly. I think because you'd raced it so many times in your head and you'd rehearsed so many times. And I'd done a lot of reconnaissance training on the course. I knew the course really well. The conditions, where the wind usually blew from, at what time of the day. Also who my main competitors were for each year. And it's almost, I liken it to driving a car. When you first learn to drive a car, you're overwhelmed with everything you need to do. Clutch in, put it in gear, who's around me, who has right of way? And after a while, when you become good at it, it's
autonomous. It's
subconscious, exactly. And I think that's what it becomes in sport as well. When you become very proficient at something, it is autonomous. You know, you're thinking about your pacing, your nutrition, your hydration, and all those things without actually thinking about them. So it's not like you're clock watching, the seconds are ticking away. So I just used to break the race down into little achievable segments and just check them off one at a time.
You have to, by the way, you got water there if you need water.
Thank you.
So I'm just letting you know.
Thanks.
Are there guys, when you train with some dudes, because I see it like with Rob and other ones of our fighters, there's guys that, or in wrestling or grappling, there's guys that in training, they train and they beat the world champion. Like if they were, if you could give a belt out that day, you would give it out and say, you're the world champ. But they don't turn up. Does that happen in triathlon, being that it's such a long race?
Yeah, absolutely. And even the shorter races. And I think that happens in all sports, you know, because through my sport, I've got to meet great athletes from other sports, and you start telling tales and sharing stories, and that seems to be a common theme. And I know as an older athlete now, I love the sport so much, I pay attention to who the young guys and girls are coming through, and if you see a name pop up, or you're at a race and you see a great performance, you think, you know, I'll follow that kid and see how they get on. But particularly in training, I've trained with that many athletes who swim, bike and run at a world-class level, and you think, how am I going to beat this person? And then, you know, you go to a race and that person blends in with the other 100 that you're trying to beat, so you're not really thinking about them, and you execute your race, your performance, and after the fact you think, whatever happened to so-and-so? I mean, you know, and I just think that's...
What is it that cripples them?
I think it's the mind.
But what, I guess, like what aspect? Like there are certain guys that I see, they come alive under the lights, you know?
Mate, it's a rare talent. It's a rare trait that
that exists in your sport, even though it's such a distant sport? Yeah,
absolutely. I think people can suffocate under the pressure as well, or the expectation. If you're an athlete who everyone's been talking about, you know, did you see so-and-so? Look how good they've been going in training, and then that weight of expectation, that cripples some people. Other people thrive on that, and they're the ones who thrive when the lights are the brightest. I have seen it. I've seen it a lot, and I just think it's the final piece of the puzzle that any athlete in any sport, whether it be a skill-based sport, an endurance-based sport, you need the ability to perform your best when it matters the most. It's one thing to do it in a sparring session, in the middle of heavy training, or, you know, at a regular swim squad, 3 months out from a race, a month out, a week out. I mean, you need...
And you've got to race under the same conditions, because you might have done a 5K swim, and then we do something tonight. I was going to say, and I beat you, which I won't. But I might. Do you know what I mean? But
yeah, no, absolutely. I used to train with... When I was up in Boulder, a lot of the endurance sport community's up there, and I used to train with a lot of guys who I was competing with for medals at World Championships. And some days they would get the better of you. And I think you just need to be mentally strong enough to say, well, first of all, that guy's a great athlete. Second of all, I'm in the middle of heavy training, and it's not like I'm doing every session with that person. So the levels of fatigue are a little bit different. And you've just got to have a self-confidence and have faith in your process and your plan. And this is the path I'm on. And every now and again, paths cross, and you know, I'm sure it's the same with you.
100%.
You want to outsource and get guys in for Rob to train with world-class guys, because there's no point having a world champ training with someone who's going to dominate. He's got to be tested and pushed. But that person might be fresh. They might not be in heavy training. Or I think the athlete needs to have the confidence to know that this is part of the process, but it's not the end of the story. And you have bad sessions sometimes too. You have bad days. I mean,
you have bad performances. You can lose,
and that's part of training. That's part of any sport. I think it's it's accumulating the work over time and building the fitness, building towards the performance, but also just getting on with it. You know, you have a great day in training, so what? You have a bad day, so what? You move on. Get your mind right and move on.
On that, when you win a big race, what do? Do you celebrate, party? Do you go off the rails?
No, I don't go off the rail. I mean,
do you wake up in some other country unaware of the people around you?
When I was younger, maybe once or twice. I think, you know, the latter part of my career and through the World Championships that I won, I always had my wife and family there. So, and particularly that race, like we would base in Colorado and then we'd come back to sea level, and I'd always go to Kona 3 or 3.5 weeks out to acclimate for the heat and humidity as well, because boulders are very dry. It's hot, but it's very dry. So a little bit different. But a lot of our family, my family and my wife's family, would come from Australia to watch the race. So I'd share it with them. I mean, I think, you know, I was fortunate to win 5 world titles, and when you win the first one, it's amazing. It's hard to put into words, but you've dreamt about it and you visualized it, and then when it happens, you think, did that really happen, or was it? Because it's exactly how I saw it in my dream, and I think the first one's a very personal one. It's a validation for all the hard work. After that, I was as happy for the people around me. I saw how they, training partners, coaches, family, how much they got out of it and how they enjoyed it, and old friends from school who would come to watch, and I would just go out and have a few beers with them and celebrate with them, and they were super excited to see it. And for me, that was the excitement as well, because, you know, as you know, with high level sport, you sacrifice a lot. You're away from home a lot. You're away. You miss weddings and christenings and family get-togethers, and friendships take a back seat. And they're things that are not lost on you in the hard grind, the daily grind. I often used to think about, you know, what all the lads were doing at home. I knew they would be getting together for someone's wedding or whatever, and, you know, they're the sacrifices that you make. And I was fortunate, a lot of those same people who were important to my wife and I would come to the race, so I'd always celebrate with them. The thing about that race in Hawaii, though, it's such a hard race. I mean, it's an 8-hour day in a hot, humid climate. The race started at, I think, 6:30 or 7 in the morning. I used to get up about 2:30 to have breakfast. And so you didn't get much sleep the night before. You would then race. Do the race, you would go to medical. Usually I'd get a couple of litres of fluid put back in intravenously in the medical tent, go to the doping control, press conference. You wouldn't get home until 8 or 9 o'clock at night, and you couldn't sleep because you were that full of sugar and adrenaline, and I mean, you've been fueling on gels and things like that all day long. I never slept the night after one of those long races. So then the next day, normally your sponsors would call in promotional appearances, so I'd always have a photo shoot or two. The sponsors used to love the scenery and the imagery in Kona, like the turquoise ocean and the black top of the lava. It was a great spot, and it was synonymous with that race too. So we used to do a lot of photo shoots early the day after the race, and then you have the awards that day. But that's when you would typically go out. Everyone would get together after the awards presentation and go and have a few drinks with your family, but also with your competitors. You know, I've raced a lot of them for 2 decades, some of them, and become friends, and, you know, you swap war stories. But certainly as I got older, particularly in my mid to late 30s, and those long races, they just wear you down, and you're happy that it's over, and you certainly want to go out and celebrate a great performance, but you can't wait to log a solid 8 hours sleep as well.
Man, just the day that he was saying, Eloy, it was like, I've had days where I don't sleep and come to work, and I'm like, I'm done, you know?
Yeah.
One of the things we discuss always, not just with Rob, but a few of the other guys that we train, I don't know, tell me what you think, or because some of the stuff you're saying sort of resonates quite clearly with me. One of the things to take away from that pressure was we try not to attach an emotional connotation to a win or a loss. So say, for example, try and have the same people around you that you're going to have if you win or if you lose. Like if you win, and then, of course, you know, when Rob won the world title, we were geniuses. The coaches were geniuses, and Rob was like, he gained about 4,000 friends overnight, you know?
Yeah.
So, but we kept the celebration with the same people that would have been there had he... With the celebration was like tame. We ate and had dinner and that was it. With the same people that would have been there had he have lost.
Yep.
But I see a lot of athletes, if they win, they're at the... And I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm just saying our formula, which is what it is. Like, it's not better, it's not worse, it's just what we do. I see a lot of athletes, they win, they're at the club, partying, etc. And if they lose, they're sitting by themselves.
Yeah, no, I love that mentality. It's something I've always adopted as well. I think, one of my favourite sayings is that success is never final and failure is never fatal. So, I guess Rob sees it all the time. A good, rule of thumb is that, particularly when you do a sport that's global, like the UFC, mixed martial arts, you're never as good as people say you are and you're never as bad as they say you are.
100%.
So that consistency of having the same people around, I think it's super important. I mean, any sport, and we mentioned it before, whether it's skill-based or endurance-based speed, but whatever, it's a long process. You don't wake up one day, take up a sport and be a world champ at the end of the week. It's a long road that's got its peaks and troughs. There's a lot of emotional highs and lows, and the very nature of the fact that it's a long journey means it's just a consistent grind. And I think
and that wears people down.
It does wear people down. And I think the very nature of the fact that it's such a long journey means that you need to be able to sustain a high output for a long period of time. And to do that, you need to put in place great strategies so that you can maintain a high output for a long period of time. But you need to surround yourself with a great team that's there in the wins and the losses. You need that consistency in the team as well.
Who's your team?
My team, I think any athlete's team starts at home with the family. With me, it's my wife. I mean, we've been married 20 years. We've been together. We met just before I started doing triathlon, so she's been there the whole journey. And our extended family, both her family and my family, have been very supportive. And over the years, for me, that's the core of the team. And then I've just had so much luck. I've had access to guys like Dave Scott, past champions who've become mentors and advisors. So I've had great coaches, mentors, advisors, training partners, and they're just another layer on the team. And I think the more great layers you have, the stronger the team. And it needs to be strong because it's gonna have to weather some storms, as you know.
Man,
whether it be poor performances, things that are in your control, sometimes things out of your control, politics within your sport, injuries that are sometimes out of your control. You need a good core, a solid core team around you. And I think if you look, I always think it's interesting to look at great case studies from, super successful athletes in other sports. Look, Roger Federer is a classic example. I mean, very stable family life. His mum and dad come and travel and watch a lot of his tournaments. He's had a couple of coaches, not too many, over a 20-year career. Just a real consistency of character and the way he goes about it. And that's not to say sometimes they don't change the approach a little bit, but generally speaking, the way they sit down and plan and the pathways, there's a consistency to that and to the people around. And I think it's important because I'm sure when Rob won the belt and you guys had what you would consider quite a sedate celebration, he's thinking, I want to defend this thing 10 times. The journey hasn't ended.
No, it had barely begun.
It's barely begun. And that's the thing. That's why I love that quote, success is never final and failure is never fatal. Just because you win, that's not the end of the journey. That's the start. Just because you take a bad hiding doesn't have to be the end of the journey either. So
I think, who Mark Hunt is?
Yeah.
He said, and I was kind of paraphrasing him, but he said once, if you can't take a hiding, you shouldn't be doing this sport. Like there's an ass whooping
around the corner
with your name on it at some point. And I think like that's the same as in business. Like people like if you're out there, I'm not like a risk taker, nor do I have the money to be doing it. But if you're that entrepreneur, business dude, and you lose X amount of money and you weren't prepared, you didn't understand that there was a risk that you're going to lose that money, then what are you doing? There's going to be days where maybe you went out to race and the bike punctured. You know what I mean? And you lose 2 minutes of a race.
Absolutely. And I think it's a good analogy in business because I think that's the nature of the way those people are wired. They understand there's risk. They try and mitigate it and work around it, but sometimes you just take a beating. Now, does that mean you fold up the tents and go home, or do you believe in what you're doing and you know, ante up again? So I think in sport, you know, it's a cliche to say it, but often you do learn so much more from the arse whippings.
Yeah, 100%.
Because I know I've won races and everyone's patting you on the back and it's wonderful. The sponsors are happy. People are telling you what a great performance it was. But when you actually dissect it at a later date, you think, that wasn't it. You know, I had trained to perform here. I actually underperformed. I won the race, which is great, but on the surface, that just means you beat everybody else on the start line. It doesn't mean you perform the way that you could have or should have. And I think it takes a certain personality to be able to look at a win and take the lessons out of it. Most people usually take the lessons out of a beating or a loss because it's evident you haven't got the outcome you wanted. So, but both winning and losing, there's always lessons there. And for me, that was the thing. I never tied up. Of course, I wanted to win world titles. But my goals, particularly my short-term goals, were more around the training and the processes to get there. And I had performance indicators that I wanted to hit along the way. You know, I'm not going to sit here and say that when I started my career, I thought I was going to be a world champion. I thought I could be very, very good and competitive. And I knew the sport appealed to me. Obviously, I had the genetics to do well at it. I loved the work ethic that was involved. That just suited my personality, that grind. I didn't mind that at all. And I felt I could improve. And I didn't know where the ceiling was going to be, but I thought I'm just going to do everything in my power to check all the boxes every day, and we'll see how far it gets me. And of course, then you get to a point where you're now being competitive and getting top 10s, and now you're consistently in the top 5, and now you're on the podium. And then your mindset changes a little bit. I think you think, well, okay, I'm in the conversation here, and you need to, I think at that point, as much take a mental step up. It's very easy and comfortable to be in the top 10 or the top 5. I'm sure as Rob would tell you, to be ranked top 10, that's comfortable.
And it's an amazing achievement.
It's an amazing achievement, but it gets comfortable. And then to be the guy it's a different mentality altogether, and it requires a certain mentality to be able to achieve that. But for me, I thought, I just knew it was a long process, and I thought I'll deal with that aspect of actually having to try and be the guy when I get to a point where I'm good enough. On my journey, I knew that, I mean, when I first started, I was still at uni 30 hours a week, and I had a part-time job, and I was racing guys who were full-time professionals, multiple world champions, and guys who had their pictures on my wall. I used to rip pictures out of the magazines, and guys I looked up to. And I think for me in those early days, I was just trying to narrow the gap between where I was and where the benchmark was. And I thought I could get deep into that gap. And for me, that was the journey initially. And then it became apparent I was good enough to get top 10s, top 5s, and the mindset certainly had to change because, was I content just to be a 3rd or 4th place guy, or did I want to be the guy now in the magazines? And that's a decision that you have to make.
Because when you're at that top 5, like the genetics, the physicality's there. It's just a question of whether you're going to do the 5 sessions, or depending, I don't know how many you do a day, is it longer, but are you going to do the amount of sessions you have to do? Are you going to get to bed on time? Are you going to do the physio stuff? Are you going to miss that wedding? It's all those things, because as you say, and I'm sure it's the same in what you guys do, the top 5 or 8 guys, there's probably not a lot between them in terms of their, so... You just bob when you should have weaved, and it's over. And so exactly. So what differentiates? What it is the finer details at the highest level. I think when you get to a very elite level in sport, the steep part of your improvement curve's over, you've plateaued out, and you're investing a ton of time and effort to get little incremental changes. And that becomes the endless pursuit. But you just have to embrace the grind, and that is what differentiates. For me, that's where I got my confidence from. I thought I remember early on, I got called into a training camp situation with the national team, and there was a guy in the team, Greg Welsh, who was my idol. He's the guy I started in the sport. He was the first Australian to win in Hawaii,
first non-American ever to win there. 4-time world champion from the Shire. Just a guy I'd seen on television, read about, and I got to training with him, which was just incredible to train with, a multiple world champion. But it got me to thinking, just having conversations with him, because there were other great athletes. Why is he the guy winning the world titles? And I just watched what he did, and it was just the attention to those little details to get the 0.5 percentage point. It was the willingness to sacrifice. It was going to bed early. It was eating the right things. It was doing all those little things and forming those good habits day in, day out, that of themselves in isolation mean nothing. But when you do it over 6 or 9 months, that extra sleep you get, the right diet, that extra work in the gym, the stretching routine, the body work, it just all adds up and accumulates. And so for me, there was that aspect. I had to make sure I did that. But then doing that, I got a confidence, because I knew I was on the start line. And I never used to sit on a start line thinking, I'm going to win today. But I used to think, I could not be in better shape than I am right now. Right now is the fittest I've ever been. And that was always my goal, to be on a start line saying that. And I thought, I think I'm smart enough and tough enough to get down and dirty when the going gets tough. But I've done a lot of great work for the last 12 months. I've got myself in the conversation, and that's where I got my confidence from, the preparation.
One of the things that I find interesting, you talk about the preparation, the blah, 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 all of that, because, and I think that's even though I think people don't really understand it and people don't really see it unless they work in that like sort of elite level. But I also feel that, let's assume, and that we're all doing that in that top 10, that everyone in the top 10 is doing that and everything. One of the other things that, and like even recently with Rob, we've had conversations about this, like discussions, heated debates, whatever you want to call them. And now that the training is kind of sort of established, it's understanding that there's also life and how you manage those two things. And I think people think that like you live in like some sort of crucible, and that you don't have children, you don't have work, or people say it's easy because like he doesn't have to work. And I'm like, you think that's not work? Yeah. So a lot of the conversations, I guess, that surround like, because nothing's changing, and I think people don't understand that as well. Like, say for example, like your coach might move away. Your coaches. Rob's got 4 or 5 main coaches. Yeah. There's 4 or 5 different personalities, 4 or 5 different people, different stages of their lives. One of the coaches has a kid that takes time away from what they might have had or whatever, you know what I mean? And I think that's, now that, you kind of got the training part right, it's balancing life. Can you elaborate it? Because you've got 3 kids and
that's crucial. Yeah, it's like you say, there's no patent on the actual knowledge of training. A lot of people know in all sports. I'm sure there's jiu-jitsu experts all over the world. No doubt there are. There's stand-up experts. There's
my mum can download the Cuban boxing system. You know what I mean? It's not exactly. It's not going to matter. Do you know what I mean? So
I think the first thing is coming into contact with someone who knows how to teach it for you. But what you make such a great point about the that balance that you've got to find, because as an athlete, being self-aware is very important, knowing your own strengths and weaknesses. In a team situation, it's also important that all the members of that team understand each other's strengths and weaknesses, and you find a nice happy medium somewhere, because it's not just about knowing the training and doing the training. Like you say, there's a lot of other things. I know at the height of my career, when I won Kona the last time, I got a lot of great sponsorship, and I already had good sponsorship, but it just went to the next level. And sponsorship it's not a donation. It's a partnership. A company gives you money and they want to leverage what you have done to help sell stuff. Bottom line, that's what it is. So that means appearances get called in every corner of the globe at the last minute. And I used to always think that I had a huge responsibility to my sponsors, and I did, because it is a partnership. I didn't want to take their money under false pretenses. I wanted to be a great partner and help them achieve what their goals were. But it brings a classic downfall or pitfall, I think, into focus, and that's when everybody's goals are not perfectly aligned. You get conflict. And my goal was to win another world title. My sponsors, it's not that they didn't want me to win, but their primary goal is to sell stuff
and get that photo shoot done.
And sometimes their goal and my goal conflicted. And you have that in family life as well, with coaches and kids. And that's why it's so important that you pick the right people to be in your core team. It comes back to that. It always does. And hopefully the right life partner. I was so lucky with my wife. She was completely supportive and invested in my career. She said, if we're going to have to go and live overseas for 4 months of the year or 5 months of the year, that's what we'll do. And if we're going to make these sacrifices, we're going to do it right. So you tell me everything that you need to happen. So I'd say, at the height of my career, I was training between 6 or 9 hours a day. I'd need a nap in the afternoon. She'd time it so that the kids would nap when I would nap, or when I would nap, she would take them out. It's down to those little details that it has to be choreographed. And it's so easy when you have a lot in the team, 4 or 5 coaches, to get the balance wrong. And hopefully everyone's got a mutual respect. And if the goals are perfectly aligned, usually it works out. And if there's a mutual respect and trust, because any problems can be sat down and talked through. I think the problems really come into focus when goals are not perfectly aligned. For argument's sake, Rob wants to keep the title for 5 years and be undefeated. One of his coaches might think, it's good enough for me and my business that he's just in title fights. And I'm not saying that happens, but
no. But I get what you mean.
You understand the analogy I'm trying to make. If the goals aren't perfectly aligned, then the focus, the drive is just going to be off.
You know what's a big one, I think, with that? We don't have this problem, but I see it with other athletes in combat sports. Like, let's say, and this is just a number I'm picking out, the athlete wins X amount of money, and the coach's cut is 10% of that. For arguments, I just made these figures up.
Yeah.
And the athlete fights, and the coach, and I see this with people, I can see it like clearly, they don't even understand. The athlete wants to fight again because they want to fight like you want to race.
Yeah.
The athlete wants to fight again because he wants that money, and the coach goes, fuck it, why not? I'm going to get 10%.
Yeah.
And I can see that to the point that like I meet the dudes and I'm like, you're that guy.
Yeah.
And
it's almost a conflict of interest.
It's
they should have the fighters well-being.
They should be locked up.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And the other thing I think with that, look, always with Rob, we always talk about that because we always talk about like, and you seem like you're like this too. Like, say for example, when you're a kid and you read the Choose Your Own Adventure books.
Yep.
And so you get to this point and you make this decision 6 months ago or 2 years ago. You made this decision. So now, when the next 2 decisions come up, they're over here, and then they're over here.
Yeah.
So if you start to make all these wrong decisions, and you get to this point, and some dude misses weight by 3 kilos, which can happen, he may as well be in a different weight division. But you don't have any money left because you didn't do the right thing by your sponsors. You didn't take time out to maybe start another little business or something. So now you're doing an extremely dangerous sport for money. Do you know what I mean?
It's a bad reason to do it.
Yeah, and you're getting to a point where you made all these bad decisions, and it looks like now you have either I take the fight at a risk, at my career and my safety, or B, I don't get paid, and then my family suffers. And when you look at it as like binary, just those two, you're like, well, you have to take the fight. But
you need to cut it off well before it gets to that.
Yeah, do you see that in your sport?
I think you see it in a lot of sports, in our sport as well too. People over race, and those long races you can really only do 1 or 2 a year, but people do more, and the outcome's going to be the same when you do too many. I mean, you look at elite marathon runners, they run 1 or 2 a year. They do a lot of other shorter races, but yeah, I think, and that's where again it comes back to surrounding yourself with good people. as an athlete, that's the best and most important thing you can do. Because when you have people who have shared goals and they love you and have your best interests at heart, you're not going to get down to that binary decision. They're going to cut it off way back here. So, but yeah, I know how easy it cascades, and you get to that point where you feel like you're painted into a corner and you have to make a bad decision, like racing with injury or things like that. And
that could end your career.
Absolutely.
You can't race with a bung leg for 180 Ks or whatever it is that you're doing.
No, absolutely. And that's why I think too, you know, someone who's coaching a fighter, for argument's sake, if they really have a great relationship, they're never going to put that fighter in danger. They love that person. They're going to say, you know what, you're not taking this fight on a short turnaround. We're not doing it. We're going to stick to what we've always done. Let you recover from the last one. And I think it's a great analogy that you make, because I think it happens in all sports where if you're not controlling the day-to-day, things can, and I used to love those choose your own adventure books, by the way. they were cool. But things can get out of control and can get to a point where you've now committed to a fight or a race and they've promoted it and you can't back out, and it's the wrong decision. You really need to cut it off well before it gets to that point.
I want to ask you something, because so let's say the Hawaiian Ironman, like you said, 3.8K swim, 180K ride, 42 kilometer run. So I would have trouble covering that in a car, that distance in a car. You go in there undercooked, underprepared. It can be a financial nightmare from a sponsor's perspective. And I imagine that the injuries could be quite career-ending even. What kind of injuries are we looking at?
You know, for endurance athletes, it's mainly overuse, repetitive injuries like stress fractures. I've got to be honest, my whole career I've been, well, I want to say lucky, but I've also worked hard just on functional movement and core stability, core strength and stability. I think in anything that requires sort of repetitive movement like swimming or cycling or running, good functional movement's important, not only for injury prevention, but also for efficiency and performance. So I was lucky, as I said, I had that physio degree behind me, so I knew the importance of core strength and stability, good functional movement, not only, as I said, for injury prevention, but also for better performance. So I have had a lot of enforced layoffs. I had the chicken pox.
You have it as an adult?
Yeah.
Do you know that's why Rob pulled out of that fight?
Yes, yeah. Justin told me. So
how awesome is chicken pox as an adult?
Mate, it's awful. It's awful. It's any of those liver viruses, they just sit you on your ass for a long time. I was wanting to go to the Commonwealth Games in Manchester in 2002, and I was on the train-on squad. I think there were 6 or 7 of us, and they were going to trim it down to the final team of 3. And just before the first selection race, my wife's an emergency nurse, so I always blame her. I said she brought it home from work. But yeah, I ended up having a lot of time off training. And then 3 years after that, I'd had a great season in the US, won a lot of big races. But at the end of the season, I got another liver virus called CMV, cytomegalovirus.
Okay.
And that was the same deal. It just sat me on my ass for about 2 or 3 months.
Do you know how you got that?
The doctors weren't sure. They said it could be in a dirty swimming pool. Of course, I'm in pools all the time. They weren't too specific, and at the time I didn't really, they weren't sure, so I thought, is there any way I can prevent getting it again? They said, well, chances are you won't. Now that you've had it, you'll build up the antibodies to it. So your main focus should just be on rehabilitation now and getting healthy again. It's very unlikely that you'll ever contract this virus again. So
I want to ask you something. We talk about like getting sick, repetitive stress. Is it true that for someone like yourself, you will ride on a push bike over the course of a year something like 25,000 Ks? Probably more. I mean, I know I used to do... I never really... Think about that figure, what I just said.
It's a lot. I know professional bike riders, they reckon they're at about 50,000.
For the year?
50,000 for the year, yeah. So average is almost 1,000 a week. It's a lot. It's about 5 hours riding a day.
And some guys probably a bit more.
No, there'd be a lot who do more for sure. Yeah, so
there could be guys that are professional cyclists, not triathletes, but professional cyclists that might do 60 or 70,000 Ks a year.
Yeah, no doubt. You always get those outliers who do more, and they're mentally strong enough to do it. It's part of the confidence that they feel they need. They get confidence from doing more, and they're durable enough to be able to do more. So I know when I was training for the longer races, I would do 2 5-week blocks in a year where I'd hit 700 or 800k a week on the bike for that 4 or 5 weeks, along with about 25k swimming and 140 of running. But that's not
all in a week.
In a week, yeah. It's not sustainable all year, so I do it in 4 or 5 week blocks.
When you say it's not sustainable, you would feel it in your joints, you would feel it in your immune system. How would you feel?
I think your immune system would your adrenals, everything would suffer. I felt I needed to overload to that degree, particularly early. I'd raced as a professional for 13 or 14 years before I stepped up to the longer distance. So when I stepped up, a lot of the guys I were racing who were contending for the title in Hawaii, they'd already been racing there for 5 or 8 years. So I felt I had their speed, but I didn't have the endurance that they had. So that's why I had that, particularly early in my Ironman career, I had those intensive training blocks, 4 or 5 week blocks. And mentally you couldn't sustain it. I just think you would go crazy because it just became all about, you would wake up, train, eat, go and train, come back, eat, rest, physio, gym, come back, sleep, go and train again, come back, eat, go to bed. That was your life.
Your wife must be an absolute champion, man, because if you're doing those distances, you are useless. You get home and
oh mate, she was amazing. I mean,
no discussion about her day. No,
it becomes a very, very selfish existence, and that's part of the reason why I stepped away from that longer distance racing, because it was all consuming, and I had 7 years of it. And we talked about it, and she was super supportive every year, and she was happy for me to continue on if I wanted to, but I just felt it wasn't healthy. At some point I was going to have to step away from the longer racing anyway. Again, it comes back to what you mentioned before. It's about finding a balance. You know, I now am a father with 3 kids. The oldest is in high school. I'm coaching my son's soccer team or helping to coach. I want to be more involved with that. I've raced as a professional for 24 years. I had 7 great years, 8 races in Hawaii. I still want to be involved in the sport, but not at that level anymore, because I just think from an emotional and mental health standpoint, for me personally, it wouldn't have been sustainable to keep doing it, because it would have been at the expense of my family, and I felt guilty enough anyway, and it was my job. It was my job, and that's what Neri always said to me. She said, if we're going to do it, you've got to do it right. So I always had those words ringing in my ears thinking, should I just stay home with the family? No, got to do that extra gym session. I would always do it. I would always do what needed to be done, because I always had Neri's words ringing in my ear. If you're going to do it and we're going to make these sacrifices, the only thing we want from you is to do it right. I said, okay, well, you have that commitment and that promise. I won't cut corners. I'll never miss sessions. I'll do what has to be done. But then as a father and a husband, you think, shit, you know, it was 40 to 42, 3 hours of actual training a week. Then you throw in I was getting dry needling, chiro, massage on top of that. And I mean, my wife was amazing. 2 days a week I had this session I used to do. I used to do this 6-hour ride and then run an hour off the bike.
6-hour ride.
Well, up in the mountains, believe it or not, it goes quick. Up in Colorado where we lived near Boulder, I used to have this 200k loop, which would take me 6 hours, and it was magnificent riding, not like riding around the city. And then I'd get home, run off the bike, I'd walk in the door. Neri had been down the service station, 2 bags of ice in the tub. I'd be in the ice bath, she'd bring in a protein shake. I mean, she was every part of my success.
But you have to have that.
Yeah, it's not negotiable. You have to have it. Not only from the standpoint of she was managing my career day to day in terms of the sponsorship staff and making sure I didn't miss on any of that, but just the ice baths, the protein, everything, just everything. It's non-negotiable. You need that support. Logistically, someone doing those things, but also emotionally, knowing that it felt like we were a team and, you know, we're all in it together, and there was never any resentment or bitterness. She was totally supportive the whole time and still is to this day. And that's why I could go out and go the extra yard all the time, because I knew I had their support and they had my back the whole time.
How do you went to Ashfield
Boys High, yep.
Yeah, and you played soccer growing up?
I did, yeah.
What level soccer did you play?
I got up to youth league, so I played for RPA Leichhardt for a couple of years, did a pre-season with Sydney Olympic and loved it. I played soccer from about 5 or 6 until I was 20, and it's still my main sporting love. I love the game.
But at which point did you go, at which point with the whole thing did you go, you know what, I'm a very good runner? Because I imagine that did you swim growing up?
I did. I played a little bit of water polo in high school.
That is such a hard sport.
It is a hard sport. It's a great, rough sport too.
Yeah.
And did a little bit of swim club. My brother was mainly the swimmer in our family, but from my soccer training, I was very, very fit. So every year at athletics and cross country, I would win a lot of races and go through to zone and regional, and often I'd make it to state, and then I'd come up against the guys who did actually run and trained. But my dream was to play in the Premier League for soccer, and I think what happened was, well, I probably wasn't good enough, to be honest, but there was a lot of guys I came through with who ended up playing for the young Socceroos, and youth league at that time was really competitive, and I guess it still is now. It was the breeding ground for a lot of the guys who went into, at that point, what was
NSL.
Called the NSL. Yeah,
I have cousins that played.
Yeah, so I was at RPA Leichhardt for a few seasons, and dabbled with, as I said, I went and did a pre-season with Sydney Olympic and also one with Canterbury Marrickville. And I think what I didn't understand at the time was, at that time in Australia, the teams were based around ethnic origins. So Olympic was a Greek team, RP was an Italian team, and I didn't mind that at all. A lot of my mates, they were all my mates. That's who I grew up with. Who I played soccer with, and they were the guys I used to knock about with. They were all my good mates. But there was politics from team selections and stuff that went on in the club. And I think as a 14, 15, 16-year-old, 17-year-old, you don't really understand a lot of that. And, I
think soccer's pretty bad like that.
Yeah.
I don't know what it's like now, but I grew up playing soccer as well.
Yeah.
No, I only played till I was about 13 or 14, but I have cousins that played, like I said, that went all the way through.
Yeah.
And I could see it, especially looking back, you can see it.
Yeah, I think it was just the way it was. Probably in all sports at the time, I don't know, but I got to about 16, turning 17, and it was testing how much I loved it. I loved the sport, but I just didn't understand a lot of this other stuff, and I ended up going back to play for my local club team, which I hadn't played for about 7 years, and then just drifted out of the sport when I was 20. Well, I actually had a job. I was labouring for a builder, and I hurt myself. I had to have an operation. I got 2 hernias. So I stopped all sport for about 6 months, and then after that, I just started jogging to get back in shape, and that's what really led me into triathlons. And I'd always been interested, actually. I'd always watched triathlons, the Hawaiian Ironman on television, and also I used to love the Coolangatta Gold, the Surf Ironman race. I used to love those sort of long-distance, multi-discipline races. I used to watch triathlons on TV and see Greg Welsh and McKeely and a few others, a couple of Aussies who were winning races all around the world. So I saw those races on television. So I was always interested in it, but didn't really start in it until my early 20s. But yeah, soccer was it still is my sporting love. I love the game.
I have a question for you here with this, because I grew up playing soccer and basketball, and I wasn't like anything spectacular either one, but through that I ended up doing the sports that I'm involved with now. And looking back, I think as much as I might have enjoyed the camaraderie of team sports and whatnot, but looking back, I think even like, how I said to you that I did some triathlons.
Yep.
And that sort of became, because I started the grappling sports relatively later, like 18, 19 years old. But when I did the triathlons, I think they became the conduits for me to do more grappling, more individual sports.
Yeah. And
now looking back, with self-reflection, I realised like I was probably always more inclined towards an individual sport. I liked when we played soccer, or when we did like basketball and you did like some cross training and you had to go out and run. Like, when you did stuff like that for soccer, I always liked that. I liked being by myself. And when you were saying like you would do the 6-7 hour stuff, like, and you liked being by yourself, I can relate to that.
Yeah.
Probably it shouldn't have taken me 6 hours. The ride was probably 2 hours, but because I was doing it with some young guys that I don't know where he's ended up in triathlon, but he was a gun at that age. His name's Jonathan Grady. Do you know this?
I do. I know the name. Yes, I do. He got to quite a high level. I'm not sure what's happened to him more recently, but I do remember seeing his name at a lot of races.
Well, that kid, we were. I'm not going to say we were in the same squad, but he was like at the top end, and I was like.
Yeah, he was an elite athlete. He was good.
So I was training with those kids. So they would go out and do like a 3-hour ride, and I'd be left, like literally, it'd take me 5 hours to do it. But I enjoyed what you're saying now, the grind of it. Like I enjoyed. I don't know what's wrong with me. I don't know you this part, but I actually enjoyed it, and I enjoyed the fact of going like I'm not as good as them, but I'm going to fucking finish it. You know what I mean? And I think with like sports like grappling and wrestling, particular wrestling, I think like you can be a shit wrestler, but like you'll go somewhere and people will be like, oh, you wrestle. And because they understand that even if you're shit, even if you're not good, even if you don't have the genetics for it, like to be on the mat and get thrown around
it's tough.
Yeah, for 2 hours, like to get like thrown a few times, like they go, oh, respect. You know? Even worse probably if you're a shit wrestler. You know what I mean? Because like, you're the nail, not the hammer.
No, I agree. I think in some respects we choose sports, but sports choose us as well.
Do you think that you deep down or unconsciously had a prevalence towards individual sports?
I think, like you, I did love the camaraderie of team sports. I did, but I've never minded being on my own, and I think my personality suits individual sports for sure. So, I didn't mind the long training hours on my own. I didn't mind competing on my own. I always knew I had that team behind me.
That's the other thing. I find that in individual sports, I don't know, I'm not trying to put words in your mouth. I'm just going to ask you something because this is something else. I have these discussions because I work, I'm a TAFE teacher, so I work with people. We have these discussions, people talk about team sports. And I always think of a team sport like a soccer team or a football team or a basketball team, like a corporate ladder environment team. And I find individual sports almost like a entrepreneurship, small business.
Yeah.
Where if we have our own little business, we and you're like a single person sport, you have a team, and that team, man, you cannot do it without your wife, without some of those mentors, without some of those training partners. I know that if you took Sophia, which is Rob's wife, out of Rob's life and took Justin Lang, Justin Fitzgerald, Alex, and a few other coaches out of Rob's life, it's not happening.
Yeah.
That team is prevalent. What I find in the team sports, it is a team sport, but your mate next to you is trying to take your position.
Yeah.
Is trying to climb like that corporate ladder.
Yeah.
And I feel more at home in this team, in the team environment, in that small team where everyone's got a role, and it's almost like a small entrepreneur, like a small business, if you will.
I agree. And also over here in the little team, the entrepreneurial team, you've got to be proactive. And in the 100%. Team situation, there's always someone telling you where you need to be, what time, and you're just more a freelancer over there, and you have to fill a lot more roles. And I think I'm more suited to that. And I just think too, I did love the camaraderie and the companionship of the team, but I was definitely more suited to being an individual athlete. I think one thing I did take from my soccer career, though, when I think back on my soccer career now, I realise I wasn't as good as I thought I was, or I wasn't going to fulfil those dreams I had. But the one thing that disappointed me the most was, and I think it's hard when you're only a teenager, you haven't got life experience. When things got hard, I wouldn't say I quit, but I just went back to the local club team, and that was one thing I was determined in my triathlon career to be a lot more resilient. And I think that just comes with experience. I think when you're young and you see other successful athletes or people in business or politicians on TV, you think the tendency is to think, well, I thought that person must have always been.
He was always a politician.
They were always good. They were always the class captain, and then he was the school captain, and now he's the prime minister. And you see someone winning world championships, you think that person's never had a setback in their life. And then when you suffer one yourself as a younger person, you think, maybe it's just not destined to be, I'm just not as good. Or with the benefit of a bit of experience, you realise that, I love the Federer example. One of his early coaches said he would never be anything better than a slightly above average tour player. he's gone on to be the greatest or one of the greatest of all time. So, again, success is never final, failure is never fatal. Just because you have a couple of challenges, obstacles, that was one thing, when I look back on playing soccer, I thought, as soon as things got tough, I didn't circle the wagons. I just went home. And, in my triathlon career, when I started in my early 20s, I thought I'm going to be a lot more durable. I'm going to wear the knocks and take the lumps and just keep pushing forward.
But I think that triathlon, I've done both poorly, so I can tell you this. Triathlon and wrestling, they're sports where they really lend themselves to you just going, and you can get real far in both sports. Yeah,
absolutely.
Just being tough. Like,
mental toughness is important. You just got to keep grinding away, for sure, in triathlon, absolutely.
On all of that, I have an interesting question because, again, people, when you say, well, we lived 4 months out of the year in Colorado and this and that. And again, when people hear it or they go like, what you should do? And I'm like, fuck, this will be good. Tell me, but how can you explain, can you explain how it happened, how you went to Boulder, how was Boulder, how did you deal with living there? Was the cost of living there like? The visas that are associated with it. And the reason I'm asking this is not to pry into your life, but it's more like, well, I am prying into your life for the last hour, but I'm more like, people don't get that you're not exempt of any of these things.
Yeah.
It's not like Craig Alexander turns up to Boulder and everyone's like,
no
taxes.
No.
There's no visa problems.
It's hard work. And once again, I was lucky that my wife took it upon herself to do a lot of the due diligence and the research and just let me train. But so in 2002, when I got the chicken pox and I'd wanted to go to the Com Games in Manchester, missed out. I had to rehab. I finally got back to training. So I got sick in January. I got back to training maybe April, May. And I, as a professional athlete, I had to come up with something to do. So a lot of the people who were going to the Com Games were on what was called the ITU World Cup circuit, which is what I had planned to be on that year. And then when it didn't come off, I had to find something else to do. So I went to the US, which was, at that time, triathlon was, I guess, like golf. The major circuits were in Europe and North America. So I thought I'm going to go to North America. That was the catalyst, getting sick and missing the Com Games. And then I rehabbed and got healthy, and I thought, well, there's still 8 months of this year left. I need to do something. I need to race. I need to make money. So I went to America because they were the races that were well known. And the circuit in the US had been well established. It had been going for 20 or 30 years. Big races with good prize money, sponsorship opportunities. So I thought that's where I'm going to go. So I went there. And the first 3 years we went to America, 02, 03 and 04, we were in San Diego, which was great training. And good living too. It reminded me a lot of Sydney. The surfing culture, people were outdoors a lot, pretty laid back, which is different to a lot of the other US cities. San Diego is pretty relaxed compared to a lot of other cities over there. And had 3 great seasons training out of there. A lot of good results. But in 04, I got hit by a car training over there. And I said to my wife, we need to find somewhere quieter. So I had...
How bad did you get hit by a car?
Pretty bad. Broke some ribs and... Yeah, so this guy just ran straight over me from behind at the traffic lights, and he was under the influence of marijuana at the time. And anyway, I was lucky, and I thought it had been getting busier and busier there anyway. So I thought I need somewhere a bit quieter, where the training's good. And having been a student of the sport, I knew that Boulder in the 80s and 90s was where everybody used to go to train, but it sort of, for some reason, had fallen out of favour. And there weren't many athletes up there, triathletes anyway. There was a few runners, a bit of a running community up there, but not many high-level triathletes up there. So I went up there in 05, and I had a friend up there training, and I knew the other athletes up there, and had an incredible season, won some big races that year. And going to altitude's interesting because some people respond to the altitude and some don't. And I was a responder. I got a lot of benefit out of training at altitude and then coming back to sea level to race. And so from that standpoint, the performance standpoint, it just checked a lot of boxes. The training was amazing. you had a variety of terrain, so you could do a lot of strength work up in the mountains, but you also had farmland out east. So for recovery, you're only 40 minutes from Denver Airport, so you could fly direct anywhere in the world for the big races. The town of Boulder itself it's a big university town or college town. So when we were there over the summer, they're on summer holidays, but the town, it's like a ghost town. Well, it was when we first went there. It's very busy now, but it was probably the same size as Tamworth, 20,000 people.
It's got like 100,000 now, eh?
Yeah, it's bigger town.
So it's grown a lot.
It's grown a lot.
You still go there?
I will be going there in June just for a couple of weeks.
I will be too.
All right, we should hook up over there.
100%.
I'll show you all the haunts.
That would be awesome, actually.
Yeah. No,
when in June are you going?
I'm going June 8th. I'll be there June 8th to June 25th.
Yeah, because Rob fights in 9th of June in Chicago.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. So that he was fighting Romero again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I didn't realize. I thought that was in July, early June. Okay.
Because we want to set up a base in Boulder, which is another reason that I'm asking.
Yeah, well, it's a great town. I can tell you, I loved it for a lot of reasons. A, the training was amazing. B, my wife loved it, which made it easy, 100%. An easy sell. We made a lot of great friends up there. The living was just easy. It was just easy to train and relax afterwards. It wasn't a big city. It was easy to get around. And like I say, when you're competing and having to travel, it was very easy to access Denver Airport, fly direct to anywhere. And the weather in sort of May, June, July, when we were there, we were usually there end of May through June, July, August, just consistent. Didn't have to check the weather app. It was just fine and sunny every day.
What's it like money-wise? Is it expensive?
Yeah, similar to Sydney.
Okay.
Similar to Sydney.
But not more than Sydney.
No. Well, what you'll find is renting in that is on par. Like what you'd pay $400 or $500, I guess, a week for here, you pay the same there. The cost of living in the US is so much less than here, though. Like, I am astounded how expensive Australia is.
It's crazy, yeah.
And I always used to laugh when we'd go over there, we'd do a grocery shop, and then when we'd get back to Australia, the first shop we'd do, and mate, I operate on things like donuts and Snickers. Over there, they're like 49 cents. They're like $3 here. But yeah, everything, milk, petrol over there is quarter of the price of here.
Yeah.
And it's gone up a lot. Everyone over there is blowing up because it's double what it used to be when we first went 15 years ago. But it's still quarter of the price of petrol here. So yeah, I enjoyed the living over there, particularly a town like Boulder. It's a real outdoor sort of lifestyle town in the summer. Obviously, it's very near to Vail and a lot of the famous ski fields. I think it's only 70 or 80 minutes drive from Vail, and there's a lot of ski fields closer. But when we're there in the summer, it's just a mountain town, and people are hiking and exercising and riding mountain bikes. It's just a great town, good lifestyle there. And yeah.
How did it work visa-wise? Like, say, for your wife, for instance?
Yeah, so what would happen was the first couple of years I had to get what was called a B1, B2, so a business tourist visa. Then when I started getting sponsors, US sponsors, I had to get what was called P1, professional athletes visa.
Okay.
So now the way it works is so if I went over there to train, I'm allowed to train and race so long as it was only appearance money and prize money. I think that's correct. Because what happens is the US government takes a withholding out anyway. So when I would do a race, for argument's sake, if I won $10,000, they would withhold their percent, 25% or whatever it was. But then when I'd come back to Australia, I wouldn't have to pay tax on that because you don't double taxation, you don't pay. Then what happens? So when I was just relying on prize money and appearance fees, I could go in on the B1, B2. As soon as I started getting US sponsors, I had to get what was called a P1, which is a professional athlete's visa, and that's quite a process to go through. You got to get an immigration lawyer, but for someone like Rob, for instance, it would be easy because all you need to do
He's already got stuff like that.
Yeah, you would just need to demonstrate that you're a world-class athlete or the coach of a world-class athlete, which is easy to document and demonstrate through media and letters and whatnot. And so I would get the P1, and then my family would get a supplement of the P1 called a P4. So I would have to apply and get the visa. And then when I would get a P1, I could then apply for them to get a P4, which is a supplement of the P1 visa. Oh, but it's punishing because you'd send the whole process of putting together the dossier. I got my P1 approved. Send off your passport, the visa goes in. Then you'd have to go into the consulate for an interview as well. Once that all happened, then I'd have to, or actually I wouldn't, I'm big noting, my wife would fill out all the paperwork for them. Then I'd have to go in and take all their visas in. It was quite an operation, but it's manageable. You just got to do it fairly well in advance of when you travel, that's all.
What I like about that, the reason I ask all of that is because, when you say I base myself in wherever, people just go, he just based himself out of there 4 months out of the year. And it's a disservice to the actual amount of sacrifice. A
lot of work goes into it.
And it does not matter who you are. Like, you're not...
Yeah, no, my wife would always, when we'd get home after the race in Hawaii in October, she'd always start in November, December looking for our accommodation for the next year. Because that would always take a few months. And then we'd have to organise a car over there. I was sponsored by Toyota for a while, so we'd get a car. One time we bought a car over there and left it there for a couple of summers with some friends. But yeah, all those little things that you take for granted that you have here. I mean, really, you're just trying to set up a home base, a home away from home. So you need all those things to get around to training and supermarkets and whatnot. And Neri would take care of all of that. She was amazing with... We always had she'd source out good houses, short-term subletting or rentals. But it was a lot of work. And I tried to never take for granted. I was always so just focused on the training, and it was all I could do just to get through I used to get to the end of every day. Some days I'd fall onto my bed and think, oh shit, I haven't brushed my teeth, and I thought, stuff it, I'm too tired, and just go to sleep. So I was just so consumed with the training that I needed someone else. And that was a full-time job in itself. I mean, all the things Neri would have to organise. If we rented an unfurnished place, she'd then have to organise to get furniture from our friends or to rent it from somewhere. So there was a lot that went into it. And I mean, yeah, when you say you're going to base somewhere, you don't just turn up and they roll out the red carpet. You've got to make it happen. So, but yeah, Boulder was a great town. You guys will love it there. It's got a nice feel to it. Good facilities, running tracks, some good high school running tracks, good gymnasiums. They've got obviously Colorado universities there, so all the facilities. The college system in the US is amazing. Their schools, their colleges are massive, and their sporting facilities. I mean, their college football stadium there, I think, seats 50 or 60,000.
It's insane, eh?
It's insane. And some of the college grounds, I think the largest, I think Michigan or Ohio, they have 110,000 seat stadium. So college sport's huge over there, and because of that and the revenue that it generates, the facilities are really good as well. So I'm sure I know college wrestling over there is massive. I reckon they'd have an unbelievable training facility set up around Colorado University.
We have a friend of ours, Sergio Pena's son. He's on Eduardo Pena. He's on a scholarship at one of those universities in Colorado, wrestling over there. So for all those Olympic training centers in Colorado as well.
Colorado Springs, yes. That's about...
an hour and a bit.
It's about an hour and 15 minutes. It's just south of Denver, whereas Boulder's just north. Yeah, so Colorado Springs, the US Olympic training centers there. Yeah, there's good facilities, really good facilities in and around Colorado. And plus you get, it's just clean, fresh mountain air, and it's the altitude. If you're someone who responds, I mean, I used to get about a 7 or 8% boost in fitness going up there, which is huge.
That's massive.
Yeah.
You know, when people say that as well, like I always explain like this to people. If you run a 100-meter race, and you beat me by 5%, you beat me by 5 meters, say, I'm not in the race.
No.
Like, you got the gold medal, and I might not have even made the final with 5 meters. So 7%
is huge. Yeah. I mean, my hematocrit, my red blood cell percentage was like 41, and then I'd go up there and I could get it to 48, just training for 4 or 5 weeks up it. And one thing I loved about Boulder as well, and this is why I think it's a great training town from just a training perspective. The actual town is at 5,500 feet, which is about the same height as Thredbo, about 1,800 meters, which they say is the minimum increment of altitude that you need to go to get a benefit. But you can go drive in your car for 20 or 30 minutes and can get up to 9,000 or 10,000 feet to run and ride up there. So
how high can you sleep? Because you meant that they reckon train low, sleep high is the best thing.
Yeah, well, you can. I know I've got a couple of mates over there at the moment. They're staying in a town just out of Boulder called Nederland, which is at about just over 3,000 meters.
Fuck, that's high.
Yeah, that's quite high. So you would step up. You would go to Boulder first and settle in.
Boulder's still pretty high. It's like 1,600 meters. Am I correct?
About 1,800, I think. 1,800 meters.
That's high.
Yeah, it is. And I think if you need to have an adjustment period, you can't just step in. Well, some people can. People who the altitude doesn't affect, they're also the ones who don't get a good benefit from it. They can step straight into altitude and train. I'd always need about 7 days where I would just be very aerobic, and I'd do quite a bit of volume in that time, but I just wouldn't get the heart rate too high. Because I used to get altitude headaches, and it's usually the third or fourth day it hits you too. You get up there and you think, shit, I feel great. And the first couple of days you smash into it, and then the third or fourth day it just lays you low. So I'd always ease into it. Some decent volume, but not so much intensity that first week, and then just business as usual. Because even at 5,500 feet or 1,800 meters, you can still get out the intensity. Well, I could get out the intensity that I would at sea level.
Yeah.
And that's what I loved about it, because it was the minimum increment, so I'd get the altitude benefit, but I could still smash out the intensity. And if your sport involves explosive power and speed, you need that intensity.
You can't be too high.
Yeah.
We went to Falls Creek. You know, have you ever been there?
I have, once or twice, yeah.
What is that comparable height?
I can't remember.
It's about that. It's about 1,600.
Yeah, I think Falls Creek from memory is about the same as Thredbo, yeah.
Yeah, and so it'd be just like being in Boulder.
It'd be like in Boulder, yeah.
Yeah, and so we didn't notice the difference massively, and we weren't there long enough. We were just testing it out, blah, 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 blah. But I think the best thing is going to be to have a base in the US, because if the fights are, say, for example, in Vegas, we want to be able to base those last 4 weeks at altitude in the US and just go over to Vegas.
Oh, man, we used to have a World Championship race in Vegas, the half Ironman Worlds, and I'd always train for it out of Boulder, because it's like a 60-minute flight, 70-minute flight from Denver to Vegas. Very easy, same time zone. So yeah, that's a good setup.
Hey, do you want any questions, Eli? You have?
No, I'm good.
I want to ask.
You're too talkative, Eli. Too talkative.
Mate, this guy's a machine on this. He's a machine. I can't do it. I have two things. I know that you're running out of time, so I have two things, I suppose, that I like. I think I was talking to Justin, and obviously, and I didn't want to ask this at the start because I don't want to make you sound like a meathead, because you're obviously very meticulous in your preparation. But I think you said something to Justin once that and I know how Justin is too. We've had Justin on the podcast, and he's like really meticulous guy as well. But you said something, and I don't want to misquote you or paraphrase you, but you said something along the lines to him once that if you're going to do those races, you have to be, correct me, obviously I'm paraphrasing it, but I have since quoted you anyway, so it's out there that you've said it, that you have to be prepared to run until you're going to pass out, something like that you've said to him?
I was always prepared to do it. I always thought that I was prepared enough that wouldn't happen. I had a couple of incidents in a few races, but that race in Hawaii for me was what the whole year was about. It was what my wife had put her career on hold for. It was what we were homeschooling our eldest daughter for. And I felt that I had to go very deep in that race, and I was prepared to do it. I don't know if anyone's, or maybe a couple of people have run so hard they've passed out. I was prepared to, I think I probably said something along the lines of Justin, that had I passed out, I would have been okay with that. Because for me that would have meant that I'd gone deep into the well, and I felt that was my responsibility to the family after all they'd sacrificed. That two parts, that the first part was I had to leave no stone unturned in the preparation, which tied in nicely with my personality anyway. I'm not someone who deals well with regret, so I will plan something well in advance, and then I will stick to the plan, and I'll add to it if I need to. And I will, like I said to you, I won't trim the corners off. I won't miss extra massage. I won't miss gym sessions. In fact, I'll schedule more. And so that was the first part. And then for me, the second part of that commitment to the family was I've just got to be prepared to hurt a little bit. And if that means, I wasn't so tied up with winning or losing. I didn't feel like I had to win to repay them. I just felt like I had to give my very, very best effort. And I knew I was so fit. I mean, there was a couple of times leading up to that race, I did some sessions. In 2009, I did a session 3.5 weeks. We got to Kona, and it was stupid. I should have never done it. But anyway, it was a very, very long and hard session, and it gave me super mental confidence, although it did chip away at my physical conditioning because I got heat stroke. But I did this session that I passed out right at the end of it, and I wasn't
How many weeks out?
It was 3.5 weeks out.
Okay.
And I rode the course, which was 180 kilometers with a lot of efforts. So I did something like 8 by 10 minutes efforts during that ride at faster than race pace. And I'd only just arrived from altitude the day before, so I hadn't acclimated to the heat and humidity. So I've turned up in Kona, chock full of red blood cells and very fit, but not physically prepared to deal with the heat and humidity. So for the first 3 or 4 hours, I was just crushing it. The guys I'd set out with, I left them behind, not intentionally. I just felt I was doing it easily. But then my sweat rates and everything slowly caught up with me, and he ended up getting heat stroke. And Dave Scott, who I'd been working with, he said to me, I told him about it. He said, "You're an idiot, that you've just cost yourself the race." I went and had a massage that night with a guy I used to see in Kona who'd massage me every day over there. And I didn't tell him, but he felt my legs. So what I did was, I did the session, passed out. They put me on this spinal board, because where I passed out, I'd just finished the ride and I'd finished back at the pool, Kona Aquatic Centre. And because I passed out, a few people in the car park ran in and got the lifeguards in there, and they came out, and I woke up, this girl was slapping my face, and she was saying,
You've woken up like that many times, Eli.
Eli, he can relate. So this young girl, this young lifeguard, slapping my face, and I just came to and I heard her say, "That looks like the guy who won here last year." And I had one there the year before. I was so embarrassed. So anyway, they patched me up. I went home and jumped in an ice bath. And stupidly, rather than rest, I was so driven to just make sure that I did all my sessions. I was meant to run off the bike. I went and ran. I went and jumped in an ice bath for 10 minutes.
Oh, after you passed out?
Yeah, and then I went and ran. And anyway, then I had a massage that night. So I was all about training hard but trying to recover hard as well. So I went and had a massage that night, and the guy, he put his hands on my legs, and he's like, what's happened to you today? Your muscles feel like granite. And I told him, and he kicked me out. He said, "Get out, don't come back. You're an idiot. You've cost yourself the race." And I actually got a lot of confidence from that, because I knew that I'd read somewhere that when you get very, very fit, you pass out like that occasionally. And I had done it a couple of times before. If my wife was here, she'd tell you I've been known to faint at dinners after long training days. And anyway, I just thought, and this, I guess, and you must see this all the time working with athletes, you want to be positive and put a positive spin on things. And I wasn't even trying to put a positive spin on it. I actually got off on it. I thought, I'm actually in a position where mentally I'm so motivated for this race. I'm so up for it. I could push myself that hard. I didn't know anyone who could push themselves so hard they could pass out. I mean, I didn't mean to give myself heat stroke, but I think that was the story I was relaying to Justin when I said, yeah, if I pass out in this race, well, then it's a job well done, because, of course you don't want that to happen. But I do remember going into the race saying to my wife that I'm going to push so hard that, anything could happen. So, and that wasn't lip service. I meant it. I felt it was part of my job. It was like what I'd trained to do. I'd trained to get myself, and it's a fine balance though, because you've got to, I guess it's like being a fighter. You're trying to mitigate the risk. You think you can knock this guy out early, but there's a risk if you go for the knockout, you leave yourself open. So you got to be a little bit patient as well. So it's that fine edge of.
And I think what you're saying as well, like more so, it's not just the actual thing. It's like the mental thing is like, you're willing to go to a certain place, and those dudes that are fighting, like, 'cause they're fighting for 25 minutes, like, it's not an Ironman, but to fight, if you have
it's crazy cardio.
If you have an argument with someone for 25 minutes, they fuck up your day.
Man, those guys have crazy cardio. 25 minutes, that's ridiculous.
At full pelt like that. And they're also, like, up here, they're willing to go to some dark places. I'm not a psychologist, but like, and if you're like all the stuff that you're saying now, if someone's gonna race you and they're not willing to go there, and unless they're super gifted, I don't know, they'd have to be, part roadrunner or something, they're not going to win. They're not going to beat you.
But like you said before, the top 5 or 8 fighters in the world all have similar skill sets. If you have a great skill set, you're physically trained, and your training practices are awesome, and you can combine it with that mentality, someone has to match that to be in the ballpark with you, for sure. And I just felt it was my responsibility. I was well aware of what my family had sacrificed, and I remember my daughter, it was very hard. Homeschooling was very hard for her, and I felt really guilty. I felt I'm the one who's creating what I hope is a great life, but it's also a bit uncomfortable for the family. Yes, we're traveling, and that part's wonderful. We always, as a family, we love traveling together, but it wasn't without its challenges. I knew my wife missed her career, and I knew my daughter missed all her friends at school, and homeschooling was really hard for her. So I thought, I have to make sure I put in the best effort, and just to honour their sacrifice and to thank them for what they've sacrificed.
Awesome. I don't want to take too much of your time. We spoke earlier. Just want to say a massive thank you for coming. Yeah. I know you just swam 5Ks. What's on the rest of the day? I'm
going to get home, hop on the indoor bike trainer, and then I'm running track tonight at Sylvania.
How long's your indoor bike?
It'll be just 60 minutes. So I had an easy run this morning. Thursday's one of my bigger days of the week these days. Easy run, swim.
So you ran already too?
Just an easy 40 minutes this morning, yep.
You did 40 minutes?
Swam 5.
How far do you run in those 40 minutes?
I did about 8.5K. So it's just an aerobic, about just under 5 minutes per K.
And then you did 5K swimming?
5K, yep.
Drove out here?
Drove out here.
Did your podcast?
Did the podcast with you boys. Drive home, hop in the garage.
Which for anyone that doesn't know, it's like an hour drive home.
Yeah. Get on the indoor bike trainer. As I said to you before we came on air, I was on there last night, and I saw they were replaying Rob's fight with Romero. That'll be a cracker in June.
It's going to be crazy.
Yeah.
But then you got another run today.
Yeah, tonight I do. Well, normally my family are away at the moment, coming home tomorrow, but normally my daughter runs track on Thursday nights at Sylvania, and I normally take her, and there's an old man's race, a masters race. I'll jump into that one tonight. It's
How far?
5K. It's 5K run.
That's solid.
I feel like I got to go to a run.
It's a solid Thursday.
It's a good Thursday. Yeah, just another day. I love it. What can I say? Training's part of my life. I certainly don't train as much or as hard as I used to, but it makes me feel good. I think it makes me a better person to be around when I train, and the sport's given me a lot. The sport owes me nothing. I owe it so much, and I love being in and around it. Like I said, I don't race as often as I used to, but when I get the chance, I know the performance that I want to deliver, so I train to try and deliver that performance.
Is there anyone you want to shout out? Any business ventures that you have going on at the moment? I know you're coaching too now.
Yeah, got a little coaching business called Sanzigo. So I've been lucky in my long time in the sport to come across a lot of the best coaches, endurance and triathlon coaches in the world, and so I've partnered up with some of them. We've got a little online community, and a few other things. I'm still very lucky. I've got 12 or 13 great sponsors, so a lot of my travel these days is just promotional work for them. They were always very supportive when I was racing and would let me prepare the right way. So now I'm sort of trying to pay them back and get around to all the expos and the photo shoots and the things that they want to do to leverage the relationship. So I'm busy, but no shout outs other than to Justin at Live Athletic for doing the intro and getting me on with you guys. And the only shout out really is to my wife and to the family for their support. I mean, that's why I'm here.
Awesome. Thank you so much for coming out today. Really, really appreciate it. Thank you very much.
My pleasure, Fab. Thanks for having me.